introduce yourself and a little bit about your background and how long you've been here at Wagon Wheel.
I don't know if I can remember how long I've been here. My name's Robert Miller. I'm an equity guest artist for Man Who Came to Dinner, and I have been working at the Wagon Wheel on and off since I started in 1992. No, 91 was my first season. So you do the math. I'm old.
Okay. In The Man Who Came to Dinner, the play for this season, you play Sheridan
Whiteside. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about him and his character.
He's based on Alexander Woollcott, and that was there used to be a group in New York. They were kind of the trendsetters of their day, called the Algonquin Club, and that was because every week, I think it was Fridays, they had lunch at the Algonquin Room in New York. And these were the elite, the smartest of the smart and the coolest of the cool, basically the George Clooney's of their era. And Woollcott was kind of like a grand master of ceremony. So the play's based on him, but also it takes a lot from Falstaff, from Shakespeare, because it's the portly, guy like me who's very witty and kind of an SOB. I mean, he does what he does. Everything is about him. So it's all about him manipulating everyone else. And as long as you're doing what he wants you to do, you're okay. But the minute you stand up to and try to do something different, then he rains, fire and brimstone.
Yeah.
So it is very entertaining. It's all about the wit of that era. But I don't know. He's likable, but he's not.
Well, I was watching the 1939 version, and I kept thinking this is like a Donald Trump early version.
Yes. And at that time period, if you think about it, that's right after the Depression. It was very stylistic to make fun of the wealthy. I mean, and to make them out, because everybody was poor and the wealthy had kind of same scenario, but it was very easy and very big in Hollywood, if you think of the films of William Wilder and all of them at that time, to poke fun at the wealthy, which is what a lot of this play is. So it's a comedy of manners and all of that. But I think he's entertaining simply because he has an answer for everything. This guy is never dumbfounded. His mouth never stops. Now, when you're playing, and it's not so fun because I'm about a good 60% of the dialogue, and I'm getting old. It's getting hard to memorize all this stuff. So I much prefer the smaller roles.
Okay, but a lot of the show then is on your shoulders. I mean,
Yeah. They got him in a wheelchair. And it's an antique, just like me. So it squeaks and everything else. We've nicknamed the wheelchair lovingly. We call it Mengele because it's torture moving that darn thing around. But it is very fun. We're having a lot of fun with the show. And the characters that come through are all based on stars of that time period. And like I said, he's based on Woollcott. His best friend is Banjo, who's based on Harpo Marx. And the two, Woollcott and Harpo, actually performed this. I didn't know this. Ben found this out. When the play was first written, they performed it in Summerstock in a few places together, playing these two characters, which I think is extremely cool, that they're characters based on them and they played them. So it is the only acting Woollcott ever did. He was a radio personality. He was a reviewer, a critic in New York, and he reviewed books, films, and of course stage play and opera. So he was very erudite and I'm tired of using large words because that's all I do in this show. Yeah. It's very fun.
I'll try to spell them correctly.
Yeah, don't ask me.
Now, in the play, he's going to dinner with the Stanleys.
Yes, he's on a lecture tour. And he never goes to anyone's home, but Mrs. Stanley is like the head of her local women's club, and she talks him into coming. This has all happened before the play actually starts, and when he showed up, he slipped on ice on the front step and fell and broke his hip. So he is now in their house, because in that time period, ambulances were kind of rare too. So they just put him up in the house, and he is trapped in this house until he heals, and he hates it. He just hates it because he's in a fictional town, Visalia, Ohio. And this is a guy who's used to being in New York and eating lobster for breakfast. And he's now in the middle of Ohio. And that's where all the humor comes from.
Yeah. And there's a cast of characters. There's Mr. and Mrs. Stanley. There are two kids and a nurse. And
yes, Miss Preed. There's their kids, Jude and Richard. And then their staff is the cook is Sarah. John's their, I guess, butler, manservant who helps, because Mr. Stanley is the local factory owner.
Yeah.
And then there are people who comes through. There's Adolph Metz, who's the leading authority on insect life in the world. There is Beverly Carlton, who is based on Noel Coward. And of course, there's Banjo, who is based on Harpo Marx, and then there's Lorraine Sheldon, who is based on, and now it just jumps out of my head. Oh shoot, I won't be able to remember that. She was one of the big Broadway stars of the day. She was, and I remember her alter, or her enemy, if you will, was Catherine Cornell, who is spoken of a lot in the play. The two of them, June. Gone. I'm old. But I try not to think about who they're really based on all the time, because that's the last thing you want to do is slip in the wrong name. So it's like block those. I have enough to memorize without memorizing things I don't need to say. So
Yeah. But the Stanleys are kind of a rich family. I mean, Sheldon is kind of richer, or is it he's just a different kind of rich?
He's a different kind of wealthy. You could look at it this way: he would be the Simon Cowell of the era.
Okay.
You know, he's wealthy, and it's wealth through wit, and it's a scathing wit. And if you think about that time period in the Midwest, that was not the norm. People were not sarcastic. They were not, you know, it was all, everybody was prim and proper. And this guy comes in and he's just like a rapier wit. He's just going through them. Mr. Stanley owns a factory, so he's your typical blustery, you know, banker, and not a banker, but that type.
Yeah.
Because that is a set type, like I was saying earlier, in all these films, and like Petrified Forest, and almost all of those things. Even Wonderful Life, you know, the banker is always kind of a villainous character, and he's not in this. I'm kind of the villain, yet I make him out to be the villain and pick on him. And it's kind of fun for me. I'm having a lot of fun with this because Chucky's played Mr. Stanley. And that first year when I was here in 91 was the last time they did this. And I played Mr. Stanley, and Tom Rowland played Mr. Whiteside.
Okay.
So it's kind of weird being in the chair instead of looking at it in this one.
So you come full circle then.
Yeah, exactly. And all these years later, I'm playing this. I'm going, oh my gosh, I've become Tom Rowland. I was once the new kid, and now I'm the oldest guy here. I've now got the point of being, I think I've been here longer than anybody else.
I think 20.
Because Scott came in after I left. Tony Homerkhauser, who was just here for Ragtime, started I think he was in the last show my first year. So technically, was he in it, or was it the next year? I could never remember. It all runs together. We, you know, I've done so many shows here, but I just know this was that first season I was here. Wendy Roby came back and was a guest star. Wendy Roby was from Twin Peaks.
Okay.
The redhead with the eye patch. She started here as a young actress, and she came back as a guest star to play Whiteside's secretary, Miss Cutler, who's like the second lead of the show. Yeah. So, because that's where all the real plot lines develop, is through his secretary falls in love with the young newspaper man, and Whiteside's trying to break that up. Yeah. Because he doesn't want to retrain a secretary. It is all about him. So that's where all of the comedy ensues. Hopefully. Okay.
Well, this is like the third comedy, House of Scene Business, Sister Act, and then this one. It's obviously playing out a musical, but is this similar to the other comedies this season, or different kind of comedy? Or
it's a different kind of comedy. I mean, first off, you know, they're musical comedy, and they're a little more. I don't want to say slapstick. They're much more modern comedies than this is. This is not slapstick either, but it has an element of that. It is like those 30s comedies with the Marx Brothers and all of that, you know, and I'm trying to think of all the other, you know, we reference them, but it is that style of comedy that made Jimmy Stewart a star. Because I don't think he's in the movie, but the one character, Bert, is kind of a stock Jimmy Stewart character. Yeah. The all-American guy who just unknowingly stumbles into, you know, the viper pit and somehow still manages to walk out unscathed, which is what Jimmy Stewart did in almost everything in those, like Philadelphia Story and all of those types of comedies. So
yeah. Well, the movie version that I'm thinking of, it came after the play was written, right? Mm-hmm. The one with Betty Davis and Billy Bird.
Yes, and Monty Woolley.
Okay.
That just came to me. Woohoo! Monty Woolley did the film, and that was, I think, the film was in 1940 because the play was such a hit. At that time, they tended to go back and forth very quickly, especially plays to film, because Hollywood was really hungry for scripts. And if a play was a big hit like this, then once it closed on Broadway, they were ready to shoot the film. So.
Okay. So I'm sure this play has been revised and what's the word? I'm not revised. Revived a few times.
Yeah, I think it has had several. I don't know what the last revival was on Broadway. I think it might have been when we did it back in '91.
Okay.
I'm kind of shocked that it hasn't, because it is one of those things that, because we're working with kids who are getting theater degrees or studying this. This is one of the plays that they all know, because it is one that they do. My daughter has her degree in theater. She's not in this, but she has a degree in theater from Butler University, and she's like, yes, we studied it, we did it. They all know this play because it is a prime example of this style of comedy from the 30s, the comedy of manners, as they called them.
Okay.
So
what would other comedy manners be like? Can you think of any?
Put me on the spot here.
Just to kind of compare.
Well, I said Philadelphia Story, although that's a little more, slightly more on the dramatic side than this, but then again, not. I mean,
Katharine Hepburn was in that, right?
Yes, Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant. And it's all about, film-wise, I can tell you, it's like Meet John Doe with, oh gosh, I can't even think of his name anymore. But things like that, and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Okay. It's all about throwing together different classes of people who normally would not meet, and what ensues from their interactions. That is really why it's called Comedy of Manners, because normally Whiteside and his group of movie stars and professors and all that would not meet the Stanleys in an interactive basis, other than they might meet them at dinner party or something. But to be forced to live together, or to be in a situation where they're kind of trapped together, that's where the humor comes from. Yeah. So, it is kind of funny to me that he makes up with everybody in this play except Mr. and Mrs. Stanley. Their kids love him, but those are the only two people that he never makes up with in the play, which is also back to that 30s thing of getting on the wealthy people. They're factory owners, and he's pushing for their daughter wants to marry the guy who's a union organizer. And that's why they're all upset with him. And he's like, no, she could, It's very cool, because there are a lot of ideas in this play that now we won't even notice, but at the time were huge, that women have a right for self-determination. So it's got a lot of, the very progressive views of the 30s against the conservative views of the 30s, and that's where all the humor is. Think the Trumps and the Clintons forced to live together. There you go. So
that's gonna be a play someday.
Yes, hilarity ensues. Just keep the nuclear bombs out of it, and we'll be okay.
Okay, my last question, because I guess I'm running out of time, is this play for the whole family? Older? It seems like it'd be an older kind of crowd.
I would say you want the kids. There's a few dammits, but beyond that, I would think kids need to be at least, I would say, 16 to grasp all of the humor. They might be bored. It's more of an adult humor thing, and not by adult like dirty, but adult maturity level. I don't know, no small kid is going to find this interesting. They're just not. Until Harpo comes in at the end of the play. I mean, Banjo comes in at the end of the play. There's nothing they're going to find. There's, a few little bits of, shtick and stuff, but nothing that's going to keep them engaged. This is a very cerebral humor. So I would say at least 16 to enjoy it. Yeah. Who knows what'll show up, but...
Well, thanks very much, Bob.
Thank you, David.